COVID fears hit Wall Street. Jeff Bezos goes to space, and Netflix reminds office workers everywhere that what you say on Slack is not private. Tuesday Need to Know. Let's go. Good morning. This is Cheddar's Need to Know podcast for Tuesday, July 20th. I'm Jill Wagner with Carlo Versano. Hi, Carlo.
Hey, morning, Wags. Busy news today, huh?
Yeah, let's just jump right in. Wall Street had its periodic reminder that, yeah, there is still a pandemic going on. Yesterday, the Dow dropped more than 700 points for its worst day since October. The S&P fell as much as 2%. Stocks, oil prices, and bond yields all slid over concerns that the economic reopening is being threatened by the spread of the Delta variant. Meanwhile, the National Bureau of Economic Research confirmed that the coronavirus recession officially lasted just 2 months from last February to last April, which would make it the shortest recession in history.
I think that what happens when the market sort of like rediscovers COVID every few months, there's sort of like this self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Like, we in the media report breathlessly about this rise in new case numbers. The market then reacts to the media, and then the media then reacts to the sell-off. It's just sort of like the self-fulfilling prophecy. I really think that we should just ban the reporting of COVID case numbers almost. It's just, I don't think that it's the appropriate metric at this point. Vaccines prevent death, not cases, right? Vaccines prevent death, not cases. I am going to say that until I turn blue. When they commit me to the mental hospital, Jill, when they wheel me out of here in the straitjacket, that's what I'm going to be muttering to myself.
You know what, though? I asked my go-to expert, my husband, about what happened yesterday, and he said that actually it's been brewing for a while. It wasn't just like this, even though we in the media reported it as a one-day thing. He said the bigger name stocks like Amazon and Apple, and those companies have been doing really well, but the smaller cap stocks, they have been lagging for a while. So he said he wasn't totally surprised. But yesterday on Wall Street, we did see the so-called stay-at-home stocks like Peloton move higher, while the reopening stocks like the airlines and cruises fell a lot. Futures as of 6 a.m. Eastern, though, looking a bit higher. So this tells you it may have been a one-day thing. And most analysts will tell you that they don't really think that the U.S. is going to go back into this full-fledged lockdown, where businesses are going to shut. So that's that big factor from just an economic perspective. So, you know, we'll see what happens today and going forward, but it's looking like this may have just been a one-day thing. And to that end, a day after England dropped its remaining restrictions, the Prime Minister announced that vaccines will be mandatory for nightclubs and other venues with big crowds starting in September. Here in the U.S., a federal judge has upheld Indiana University's vaccine mandate for students, which should give some cover to other colleges to require vaccines before the fall.
Yeah, so look at the case fatality rate in the United Kingdom. It's about 0.1%, which makes the Delta variant for vaccinated adults basically the flu. That's like a controversial thing to say, but if you're not vaccinated, it's not the flu. It's about 10 times worse than the flu. It's probably the worst disease you will get in your life. But I think we got to just take things into perspective a little bit, right? Some people get the flu really bad and they have long-term effects of it. Some vaccinated people get COVID, and a tiny number of those people have long-term effects, right? We've heard about long-term COVID even in vaccinated individuals, and it's too early to really know what the ramifications of that are. But the way that I'm starting to think of this is like, if you're vaccinated, you should take whatever precautions you would normally take in a bad flu season, when typically as many as 200 people in this country a day would die, which is about the number of people currently dying from COVID every day. So if that means masks in public, cool, right? If it means quarantining at home, go for it. If it means generally living your life as normal while taking some precautions like washing your hands or trying to avoid people who are actively sick, yes, I think that makes sense. That's sort of how I'm living my life. The point that I've sort of been trying to make over these last few pods, Jill, is that like, we don't rearrange our society in a bad flu season, and with vaccines safe, effective, free, and easy to procure, I just don't think that we should be rearranging our society in big ways to account for the, 40% of people who have no interest in getting this vaccine.
calls are growing for the return of mask mandates in some places that are seeing a rise in transmission driven by the Delta variant. After LA County reimposed its mandate, health officials in the Bay Area recommended that people return to wearing masks indoors. Some elected officials in New York City have joined those calls, though the city's mayor shot them down. Both the current and former surgeon generals are warning people to brace for a broader return to masks, while the American Academy of Pediatrics is recommending that all kids over 2 wear masks when they return to school.
I was a little surprised by that. I disagree with that call, but I'm not a pediatrician, so it doesn't really matter what I think. But I have to say, though, I am starting to think that, the people who used to say, like this time last year, that they were called crazy conspiracy theorists for saying that, like, once masks became a thing, they would never go away. I don't know. Maybe they were onto something. I'm serious about that. Again, when it comes to kids, right, COVID is a tiny risk to children when it comes to severe illness or death. Tiny. And the American Academy of Pediatrics has said as much. Since COVID started last spring, 49,000 Americans under the age of 18 died of all causes. 330 of those were from COVID. That is less than half the number of kids who died from pneumonia in that same period of time, and about 1/7 the number of children who died in car accidents. Again, perspective.
I appreciate your perspective. I'm just going to do one counterpoint again. Sure. Is like, I don't think wearing a mask is a big deal. I don't. I don't mind it. I have a comfortable cloth mask that I wear. I have the disposable masks when I have my face full of makeup. And I'm more comfortable given that this variant's going around. I'm not nervous about myself getting COVID, but I don't want my daughter to have COVID. There's these long haul symptoms that we talk about COVID all the time. Deaths is one number, and I agree with you, but there are people, 1 in 5, I think, is the stat of people who have COVID who are living with these long haul symptoms. We don't know the impact on kids long term. Why? To me, there's risk reward. I have zero problem wearing a mask. It's so unimportant and it is so not an inconvenience in my life. So why not just do it? And one extra layer. It's not the silver bullet. Vaccines, masks, it's all part of it. But I don't know, like I feel like I can go about my life and wear a mask and it's no big deal. So I don't know why you and others, like, I don't get why
I'm not even
it's such a big deal.
No, it's not that. I wear a mask. I don't even have a problem with it myself. My point is from a public policy perspective, and also with children. I mean, there is something to be said about, kids taking facial cues from adults, and while they're developing, not, being able to communicate with people without masks on. I think there is something to that, and that should be taken into account. Also, I'm just talking in terms of, like, societally, these mandates. I just think they're not going to do the job. The vaccines are what gets this over with.
I agree. I agree. I think we agree. I guess my only point in there, and I don't want to keep going off on this tangent, is just that I personally have I think actually they should bring back mask mandates because I think this variant is going to spread out of control. I think there's going to be additional variants as well that potentially are worse. So I don't know. I don't have a huge problem with it. All right, switching gears. The countdown is on in West Texas, where Jeff Bezos is preparing to launch himself into suborbital space this morning atop one of Blue Origin's rockets. Richard Branson beat him there, but the Amazon founder is going to go higher by about 15 miles this morning. Bezos said he agrees kind of with critics who say that billionaires should be spending their money fixing problems on Earth before launching themselves into space. Speaking to CNN ahead of today's big launch, Bezos said, quote, "We have a lot of problems here and now on Earth, and we need to work on those, and we'll always need to look to the future. We've always done that as a species, as a civilization. We have to do both." Which is kind of what we've been saying.
Yeah. These pictures of him in his cowboy hat and blue jeans out there, like running around Texas, are kind of funny. So Bezos, his brother Mark, who, by the way, is a volunteer firefighter up in Westchester County, where I grew up. I had no idea. That's a good gig. Brother of the richest guy in the world is a good gig. I want that job. Also, they will be joined by aviation pioneer Wally Funk and Dutch teenager Oliver Damon. They'll be sitting atop this capsule on a Blue Origin New Shepard rocket rocket. It's going to launch around 9 a.m. Eastern time. Live coverage all morning on Cheddar. We'll, of course, recap it tomorrow on the pod. And by the way, that anonymous bidder who paid $28 million for a ticket and then bailed out due to, quote, scheduling conflicts, that person will go on a later flight. So I guess what you take from that is they still want to go, they just don't want to be the first, and really can't blame them. I do wonder, like, what is the life insurance policy on stuff like this? Like, is that something that Blue Origin has to cover, or do you have to do it yourself? I don't know.
One thing that I did want to point out, Carlo, back in the 1960s, when we were in this big space race with the Soviet Union, and the U.S. was trying to launch a man to the moon, there were also protests at that space launch. Civil rights activists protested the moon landing, and the argument was the same. They basically said the money could be better spent. You know, you have so many people living in poverty here on Earth. And the head of the space program actually came out and met them, and he said something to the effect of, like, I don't disagree with you, you know, and if we could solve, like, the problems here on Earth are so much harder to solve than going to space.
Right.
And then he invited a bunch of the protesters to watch the rocket liftoff. And they came out, I think, with a little bit of a different perspective. So I just thought that was interesting. You know, it is one of these questions, right? Like, what are your priorities as a society? Bezos says, as you talk about, just is there insurance on these rockets and what this means in terms of safety, he said he's not at all nervous. He says he is excited. He told the Today Show he cannot wait to see what it's going to be like. He said people who say they go into space, that they come back changed. Astronauts always talk about that, whether it's the thin limit of the Earth's atmosphere or seeing how fragile the planet is, that it's just one planet. So I can't wait to see what it's going to do to me. I do wonder what he comes back with as a takeaway.
The cool thing about this capsule that they're on is there's these massive windows. I think it's the biggest windows of any ship that's ever going to be in space. So they're going to have an amazing view. Look, I think that the thing that people have a hard time with, I don't even think it actually has anything to do with space. It's a proxy for wealth inequality, the concerns about wealth inequality in this country, right? And that is totally valid and a serious issue we have. But again, I don't think anyone is really against the idea of, like, human exploration to space, whether it's Bezos or NASA or whomever, right?
You may remember, of course, Virgin Galactic. Richard Branson did this about a week ago. The difference here, besides for how far they're going, Virgin Galactic's mission required a pilot to actually fly and land the plane. It's called the New Shepard. It's totally automated. There's no pilot or professional astronaut on board. That would make me a little bit nervous.
Honestly, I think I'd trust the computers over the pilots. I don't know. But this thing also, the difference between the two, Virgin Galactic went off in, like, this thing that looks like an airplane, basically.
Yeah.
This is going straight up. This is like an old school rocket. Up, down, done.
Okay, a man who entered the Capitol and raised a Trump 2020 flag on the Senate dais during the January 6th riot has been sentenced to 8 months in prison, the first felony sentencing stemming from the events of that day. Paul Hodgkins of Tampa pleaded guilty to obstructing an official proceeding. He was spared the 18-month sentence that prosecutors had requested, with the judge noting that he did not hurt anyone or damage any property, but the judge also shutting down the defense's request that he not serve any time.
Yeah, this sentence just important because it's going to be sort of the benchmark for all of the hundreds of other cases from January 6th that are pending before courts, right? A lot of these judges needed to see what the first judge was going to do here. But there is this sort of dividing line emerging in those prosecutions, if you've been following them. Basically, the people who entered the Senate chamber are being charged with felonies, while those of them who sort of just kind of like went into the Capitol and kind of like mindlessly walked around the rotunda and the halls, like taking selfies, they are generally speaking getting misdemeanors. That's sort of the dividing line. Those are the folks that, you know, Trump and the sort of Trump Inc. want you to focus on, saying, because the argument there is like, hey, these were just sort of like this was a tour group that got out of hand. They don't want to call attention to the people like this guy who was, when he was arrested, or not when he was arrested, but when he went into the Capitol, he had a backpack full of rope, or the guy at the Senate chamber who had the zip ties or the QAnon shine shaman dude, or whoever planted the bombs outside the DNC and the RNC that they still have not found, by the way, or the people who are chanting, kill Pelosi, hang Mike Pence. There is this sort of massive effort underway to rewrite the history of that day, and I just want people to be very careful about getting caught up in that. It's being led by people like Tucker Carlson, who are sort of talking about how this was like an FBI false flag. They're going so far as to make this woman, Ashley Babbitt, who was killed by police as she tried to break into the House of Representatives, they're trying to make her into some sort of like martyr. She was the victim of maybe the most justified police shooting in history, I would argue. So just be aware. Like the effort to rewrite January 6th is underway, and everybody knows what happened that day. The pictures speak for themselves.
The White House blaming China for the recent hack of a Microsoft Exchange server that compromised email accounts around the world, as well as other cyber attacks that the administration says were approved by Beijing. The accusation was coordinated among allied governments around the world as a way to publicly shame China's state-sponsored hacking operation. I'm sure they feel terrible.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, they're waking up in Beijing this morning like, oh my God, I can't believe we got publicly shamed.
What did we do last night? Like a terrible hangover. Yeah,
totally.
They don't care.
Yeah, of course. Unlike the response to the Russian hacking from a couple weeks ago, the public shaming not including any sanctions against any Chinese officials. There's really three things, right? Those are the three options when it comes to this sort of cyber hacking. You can shame them, you can put tariffs on trade, on their goods, or you can put sanctions on, officials in those governments. Those are sort of your options. None of them are particularly good, which just, I think, speaks to the fact that this is a problem. The cyber hacking stuff is a problem that really does not have an obvious solution.
The only obvious solution is to just really beef up our computer systems and our systems. Like, that's it. I mean, and I sometimes cringe because we at work have like this two-factor authentication, and I forget my password pretty much every week because you have to change it, and then you have to go and log on an app, and you need Face ID. Like yesterday I was trying to log in to something, and then my phone was saying it wasn't recognizing my face, and I'm like, oh, can I get in? All I'm trying to do is look at this one thing. But as kind of annoying as it is, I guess that's the fix, right? I mean, we had learned with some of these prior hackings that there really wasn't a lot of levels of security. So I think that's it. As annoying as it is, there's a reason that you have two-factor, do a three-factor, right? I mean, what difference does it make? It should be as secure as possible, especially when you talk about power grids and really classified information.
Well, Jill, and it's also just a sort of like literacy, right? Like, I mean, I don't want to call out one of my parents, although I guess I'm about to, but they got a text the other day that they showed me, and they were like, this says that Chase is saying that my account was hacked, and it sends, should I click on this link? And it's like, no, this is obviously one of those phishing attempts, right? Like, you can tell the URL is some random, numbers and letters. It's not from Chase Bank. So yeah, a lot of it has to do with us just being aware that, there are people out there and here and abroad that are trying to get into our accounts, right?
Netflix clarifying the reason why 3 senior marketing execs were abruptly fired last week amid rumors that they were canned for criticizing their superiors over Slack. According to an internal message from co-CEO Ted Sarandos, the execs were let go for making comments critical of their fellow employees in a public Slack channel, sometimes while in a meeting with those employees. The comments were not characterized as hateful or derogatory, but went against Netflix's eternal policy of radical transparency. Basically, the company's internal motto is that you should only say things about fellow employees that you would say to their face. But I think this shook up a lot of workers who were like, oh my God, who kind of don't realize necessarily that their bosses can read their Slack messages.
Yeah, well, Sarando's making a point of saying that the company doesn't routinely monitor Slack messages, but that this was happening in a public Slack group. So, I mean, again, Slack is not private, right, for the 1,000th time. Even if you're in a group that has like the little lock icon that signifies that it's private, people, the people upstairs can read that if they want to. If you're going to rip on your colleagues, just do it the old-fashioned way at happy hour, right?
Yes, exactly. I'm just thinking about my old days at NBC. We were talking about at NBC we had a little bit of a different system. It was before the days of Slack. We used iNews, And I remember I worked at an assignment desk, and one of my colleagues, you do these top line messages, and they're a little confusing because sometimes it says the name of the person it's going to, even though you think maybe you typed that. Anyway, this person wrote something not nice about one of the reporters who was in the field. And about 10 seconds later, the phone rings, and it's that reporter asking to speak to the worker. And it was just a reminder: be careful what you type.
Did I ever tell you? I have the worst of those stories. And when I started working very quickly, when I started working at CNBC, first job I ever had, they they sent out like news alerts. They go to like an email alias to the entire company, everybody at NBC Universal, right? Basically, right? And I meant to forward that with some snarky message to a friend of mine, and I accidentally hit reply all. And I swear, Jill, I shrunk. I have never been so embarrassed in my entire life. Luckily, what I wrote was not that like bad or anything, but from that moment on, I was like, be careful. Whatever you write in email or Slack or whatever, just assume that it could be on the front page of the New York Times the next day, right?
Wow. And you've lived to tell about it.
Exactly, yes.
Okay, that is what you need to know for Tuesday, July 20th.
Okay, Godspeed, Jeff Bezos. We'll see you guys mañana.